everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my channel. We are literally starting off this video seconds after I closed off the last vlog on this 1890s tea gown. So if you haven't seen that vlog yet, please do click this link right up here or down below in the description to watch that one, or you can proceed with watching this one. So we are going to continue on with this project today, and the first thing that I'm going to be doing is the collar. Now I was trying to figure out just exactly how this yoke collar bit, because that's what I mean by collar. Right now it's yoke, not the collar. I was trying to figure out how this yoke is made just by looking at my extant gown, which again, if you haven't seen the extant gown video, I will also link that up above and in the description, so do check that out. And I determined that by looking at this yoke, you can see the grain lines of the linen turn as it goes. So what's happening on the yoke is that I'm pretty sure that it is two straight strips, because there's a center back seam, so it's two strips, and they're literally just being pleated around the neckline and having that pleat continue out like a dart down to about this range here. I do have to measure the yoke because I can't remember off the top of my head just how far it goes out, so I'm going to take a measurement off of the original tea gown, but you can tell in just even looking at the pictures that it doesn't actually go out all the way to the shoulders, which kind of surprised me. There's about like a 1-inch gap between the shoulder seam and the edge of the yoke. And that was really, really interesting to me because it seems like it would wind up making it quite a bit narrow. So one of the things that I have to experiment with that is seeing if this measurement, aka from about here to here, if that equates to looking too short in the front and in the back, because I have pretty narrow shoulders just for my size, and so I worry that it's gonna make it look shortened in the front and the back as well. And in that case, that means that I might need to actually make it not quite a strip as it's being darted around. I might need to make it like curve up over the shoulders so that it still looks the same, but isn't. And the edges of the yoke are all hidden with that braid, which I have yet to actually acquire the braid, and I'm a little worried at this point because I really want to finish this project this week. So it means that it has to be procured locally. I have already checked Amazon. I didn't find anything that looked like it would work. It's like a narrow soutache, but it's more like a braid or cord, like that sort of thing. So I don't know what Joann's might have for me, but when I looked at soutache options on Amazon, like something that could be gotten here quickly, they just all look like shiny polyester-y, and I don't want that. So I'm gonna take a trip to Joann's this week, see what I can find, but it needs to be thick enough that it hides the seam line, because that was one of my first things I noticed about the extant gown was like the seams, the edges of the yoke, or I think of like the cuffs, other places where the braid is placed, it wasn't obvious where those edges were because they are hidden under the cord. So yeah, we're gonna start by just taking strips and trying to pleat them around the neckline. And then once that's done, then I can put the facing on and do the closures, which will make it much easier because I won't have to pin myself into this dress. So let's get started. So I've just been taking some measurements of the yoke, kind of going around, taking one in the center front, at the shoulder, and then at the center back as well. And it's actually only 4.5 inches from the seam here to the seam here. And I think that actually translates pretty darn perfectly to mine. So if we look here at the top of the shoulder, I'm 6 inches total. Now keep in mind this includes a seam allowance, so really it's 5 inches. I'm actually maybe a little bit narrower shouldered than that lady was, which is pretty incredible considering she was tiny. But yeah, basically that 4.5 measurement, once you add the seam allowance, would take us to the 5 inches here, and then there's a 1/2 inch seam allowance here. So that leaves me with only a 1/2 inch space here, whereas over here, we actually have about 1 1/8 inches between the seam and then her shoulder. And I don't think it would have been that it was dropped off the shoulder, though I suppose that's entirely possible. But generally in the 1890s, they did keep things pretty on the shoulder, because then the better to poof, my dear. So I might be shortening that measurement here, especially because it actually is graduated anyway. So it's only 3.5 inches here at the center, and then 4.5 here. It was about 4 like right here, and then it's 4 3/4 by the center back. So it doesn't matter if it's completely straight, but you can see what I was talking about with the grain line here. So the grain line, it's like that way, then that way, then that way, and it's doing that all the way around the back as well. So you can tell that this is probably just a straight strip across the grain and then just folding it up. So there's almost nothing in that pleat there, but then like up here, there's quite a bit more. You can see how much of my finger is into that pleat. So that's what's getting it to curve around the neckline. So I think just a straight strip of the wool should work. Now, of course, my wool is textured. It doesn't have that sort of pattern, you know, with a stripe of the grain, but I think that it should still do just fine, even with that sort of woven in pattern that I have. And then this is that braid that I was talking about. So it's a very, very narrow braid. And in fact, it's really only about 1/8 of an inch, and it's just been applied to the top. You can see where some of the seam is kind of poking out there. She didn't get it perfect, but it's pretty darn good on the seam, hiding most of the seam. Okay, so I have my long strip here now for the yoke, and I have folded up the bottom hem just by about 1/2 inch. And what I did here was I pulled it down, it's hooked on the front now, I pulled it down to see where it would hit in the center back, and it was way past where those pleats were in. So I actually undid the basting of those pleats. You can kind of see that was the basting line of those pleats. I undid that, and they're just pinned all in place now, which I probably could have just done in the first place, just left them pinned. And as you can see, they're kind of falling down in a very interesting manner. But basically this came down to this pink line. So now I need to cut away the excess, but I need to make sure I don't cut too low, because this is coming directly to this line, which means that the pleats based on this guy, so that would be that line where it comes down to, and the pleats are just below that. So I think what's happening here is that these pleats are cut to probably that height, and then they're just turned in at the top and stitched down that way. I think that's what's happening there. So I'm probably going to cut mine to just above that line, just to be safe, like maybe 1/4 inch above that line, give myself a little bit more wiggle room there. And that means that they'll be cut to about here, going up to the side. So I'm going to continue this line down and then just cut across there. I'm not going to worry about doing the serging at the top of this right now, because that would mean like taking everything off and undoing all of the pins and everything to try to get it in the serger. It's all going to be turned in anyway, so I'm just hoping, fingers crossed, that it doesn't make a difference, that I won't be reserging the top or even reserging this seam here, because again, it will be under the yoke. So yeah, I'm just going to cut that and then cut again like there, get all the cool waterfall off. So this is what this looks like now that I've cut that off. And I think what I'm going to do now is probably fold the hem down and re-baste it in place, just to get it out of the way of the yoke so the yoke can come down to here. So yeah, I think that is the next plan. Okay, that was really challenging. I debated about putting this on like a slow-mo or a speed up so that you could like see what I was doing, but honestly it was so slow going, it would have taken forever even speeding it up 10 times, because I think I've been working on this for, well actually I can tell you because I was watching one of Noelle's videos. I've been working on this for 1 hour and 8 minutes so far. So yeah, it's been a really slow process. I got everything folded in up here, that all needs to be stitched in place, and it's all just pinned right now. And then everything up here is pressed and pinned as well. I'm just like pressing it on the form. Hopefully I don't have anything where the lining or the part underneath, you know, is bubbling up. I did try to be careful. In general, it was really fitting Lady Jane very well on this side. And it wasn't until I got over here to this side front here that like I don't know, I guess the bodice just wasn't fitting her well, so I had to kind of put my hand under while I was trying to do everything. So that was really challenging, but I think it's looking pretty much right. The one thing that I did have to do is that I mentioned before that on the other dress, on the old one, this is down about like half an inch from here. And I realized after I cut it, of course, that I couldn't actually do that because the way the other one is constructed, the seam is to the inside, but the way that this pattern had you construct it, the seam is to the outside. You can, oh, I just lost a pin somewhere. Got to put that back. But you can see the white right in there. So I had to make sure that this bit right here butts up right against the yoke, because otherwise the white seam allowance from the lining is going to show right here on the seam. So yeah, that was tricky, but I think either I'm done for the night or I'm gonna go take a break and come back to it, but it's also, I think, like getting close to 10 o'clock, so I should probably just stop for now after I put this pin back in. But again, I'm really liking how it looks. So now it all needs to be sewn down. I'm going to sew it right along the edge so that it can hide under that braid. And then I'm also going to sew it up here at the neckline. And then there's a lot of excess up here that where it goes past the neckline, because this was like supposed to be a 5-inch piece and this was supposed to be a 5 3/4, and I just cut it all on the straight and then made the excess go up here past the neck. So I do have to cut that down once it's all stitched in place, and then I can also serge that off so that then the next step would be like to add the collar. Though really the next step is going to be the facing, just so I can do closures, because the collar doesn't intersect with the facing at all. So yeah, facing will be next after sewing all of this down. So I was just at Joann's to try to find the braid trim and the buttons, and what I kind of expected was to find a fair amount of buttons that would be okay, and also to find maybe like a couple braid trims that might be okay, and I didn't. Yeah, once again, Joann's disappoints. I should be used to it because that's basically every time I go into Joann's, they disappoint. But the only thing that I found that might be at all feasible for braid trim was this navy blue braid. Here, I'll hold it up, see if that works. So it's kind of textured, but it's also 3/8 of an inch wide. If you pull it, it gets narrower. So my thought is, like, if I put it on tautly, but not tautly enough that it will pull the fabric, that might work. But also it's just navy blue, and I kind of wanted like a deeper blue, but not full on navy, because that just looks a lot. And it's also, even when it's taut-ish, it's twice as wide as the one on the antique. They literally had nothing whatsoever in 1/8 inch except rat tail. Yeah. So that was disappointing. And then to top that all off, they had 0 good buttons. So Joann's has like totally overhauled their buttons in the last couple of years or something, basically getting rid of every good button. So they had like a bunch of metal looking buttons that like didn't look pretty, and that's it. So yeah, oh, and then a bunch of stuff that looked like plastic garbage, because Joann's. So I got a couple of 7/8 inch covered button kits, which I hate because these button kits always fall apart and they're just obnoxious as all get out. But apparently it's the only thing that's gonna work. So I'm probably going to go online and see what I might be able to find in like the realm of maybe 1/8 inch wide velvet ribbon or something like that, to see if I could do that for the trim instead, because velvet ribbon at least is like easy to apply, and 1/8 inch wide velvet ribbon should do an okay job of going around. Heck, even 1/4 inch wide velvet ribbon is probably better than this stuff, which really is wider than that. And it's also like, this is thick too, because it's like an all-around braid, and as you can maybe tell, it unravels like nobody's business. So yeah, I'm gonna let my fingers do a little walking on Amazon, see what I can find. But I'm probably stuck with the covered buttons, but I don't know that I want to make the covered buttons until I know what the trim looks like. So this project's probably gonna get kind of postponed, because there's a lot of things, like once I get to the sleeves, I'm probably going to want to put the trim on before I make up the sleeve, because otherwise it gets harder to put trim a whole bunch of times around a cuff. I can wait on this, I think. I mean, ideally the trim would have gone into the facing, so I don't know. Why is Joann's garbage? Why is it the only option? Sigh. Okay, well, I'll check back in later. So I'm looking at drafting out my collar right now, and at first I was just going to use this collar pattern, which comes from Simplicity 9164, which is like a 50s dress, but it has that kind of nice pointed collar. And so I was just going to use that, but then I took a bunch of measurements off of the antique and also off of like the neck around mine, and determined that there's really not much of a difference between the neck portion and then like the edge of the collar is what that actually means. So that is only on my antique one, it's only 1/8 inch farther around on each side, so 1/4 inch total, than where it joins at the neck. And the collar is only 2.75 inches tall done on the fold, so 3.25 inches after seam allowance. And I think I'm just gonna keep that measurement. My neck is larger, so I mean, I'm doing that larger, but that's fine. So I think that I can kind of get rid of this and just pattern this myself. Hopefully it seems to be straight, like it's the same width around the entire way, and it's hardly any bigger there. So it almost just seems like it's a straight piece and then cut on the double fold-ish. So yeah, I'm gonna give it a go. So basically this is what that collar looks like. We've got the fold here. This has that very, very slight shaping, 1/8 inch out to the corner. And then this was the fold of the collar, is the fold of the collar. So basically it will be like that. And now I'm ready to cut it if there wasn't a cat on my table. She says hi. Putting my shiny end of the night right about to go to bed face here on screen, but I wanted to show you the collar mock-up. I think I'm pretty happy with it. I am slightly tempted to make it like a 1/4 inch taller, because it does seem just a little bit like, it's a collar, but it's not much. Or maybe I'm tempted to make it so that the points go a little longer. I don't know. I mean, I think it's pretty much right on with the extant one, but it just feels a little small. I mean, it is right on with the extant one technically, because it is the same height as the extant, and what I probably need to do is scale it up just a little bit because I am larger than the extant. That said, my neck is not very long, and so I don't tend to go with a very high collar. But yeah, I just feel like this needs just a little bit more, especially because this is gonna have 2, you know, rounds of the cording on it here. So I think it just needs to be a little bit taller. I made this out of cotton organdy, by the way, as my mock-up, so that it would still have some of that stiffness. And actually, I am tempted to just flatline with cotton organdy. Might not be the best idea because the wool is heavier than the organdy, but I realized that on the extant collar, it is just 2 layers of linen, nothing inside it at all. You can like see through it. And then of course the cording kind of helps to give it a little bit of structure. So yeah, I think I'm gonna make it just a tiny bit larger, as in taller. I don't think I need to make another mock-up for that. I do want to say, so I had that pattern made out. That actually wound up too long for where it needed to hit right here. So I did wind up cutting off a bit. I don't remember exactly how much, but I think I cut off about 5/8 inch or maybe 3/4 inch off of both ends. Somehow I just did not math right because it's late at night and that happens. But yeah, overall, I think it's pretty darn close. I mean, the shape is, again, really close. I might just extend those points just a little bit, and I'm gonna make it a little taller. So yeah, I am ready to cut that in the wool, but that will be tomorrow. So good night. So I realized what I did wrong with this pattern and why it seemed like the fold of the collar, as in like the corner of the collar, seemed a little short. And that's because I made this shape go like this as opposed to like this. So since that is the fold and that's the part that needs to stick out, that's what needs to be out. So I need to increase by 1/2 inch here, not here, which is what I did originally. So I'm going to fix that in my final. I held the organdy up to the wool and there's no way, like the wool wins. So I think I am going to have to use interfacing. Honestly, what I might actually do is interface organdy and put that inside the collar. I don't know, maybe that's too much. I just don't love the idea of interfacing the wool directly, but something's gotta have interfacing because yeah, this is way too weak for the wool. So, all right, I'm gonna cut that out and get that attached. So I feel like I'm kind of making this whole thing up as I go along and I have no idea if I'm doing it right, but basically I have my collar here, which I interface with like a fusible hair canvas question mark. I don't know. It just came out of there. So I interfaced it with that. I serged around the edges and then I folded it in half, turned up this side here, this edge, because that'll be where the neck is sewn down. And then I stitched this side here on the machine. Then I pinned it in place along the collar, matching like my center back and my dots here, which is where the collar goes to, because there's this little lap here where there is no collar. And then I was like, I don't know if I'm doing this right, because basically, so I'm doing a facing where there isn't a facing on the antique dress, but I'm doing a facing on the front closure just because I felt like it was going to be easier, right? But now I think that means that in the seam allowance here, I have to do a little cut because then I can turn this up and then clip my corner and turn this bit of the facing in. And I think that will work, hopefully. I really don't know, and I hate cutting things when I don't know, but I think the only way to do it is to try. So I'm gonna give it a go. Okay, yeah, I think that worked. I did a little cut right there down to just about the seam allowance, if it'll focus. And then this bit here, this seam allowance will get turned up inside the collar. The collar will be hand stitched down along there. But before I hand stitch that, this facing will get turned over, folded on the edge there, and that will get hand stitched so the hand stitching kind of butts up against each other. So yeah, I think that will work. I'll go ahead and do that on the other side now. Okay, so this is how I'm doing the facing. So I have turned in one edge until it meets this side right here. I guess actually what I did first was I opened up the facing from the front piece. This is the front piece of facing, and I pressed this seam open. So this is the front seam here. And then I folded this up and pressed it until it met the seam allowance. And I did that all the way up. And now what I'm doing, as you can see here, is I'm flipping it back in and pinning it in place so that that seam is right there on the edge. Now up here, I also pressed it down and I've pinned it in place so that it butts right up against the collar. I'm pressing that seam allowance of the collar into the collar and then pinning that right over the edge of the seam. All of this is going to be sewn down by hand. I am a little bit worried that this interfacing was like way too much for the collar. I have not pressed the bend in the collar yet, but like, it's really springy. So I really hope that it presses. I'm going to try that next actually before I keep pinning this, because it needs to press on this bit right here because that is the edge of the collar. And then it needs to press in the middle because it's a fold down collar. So it needs to go like that so that it can do from there to there. So yeah, I'm a little worried because this is like just 2 layers of linen. And then I used this interfacing on here, which I did not realize was that stiff. And okay, I'm gonna keep working on this and then do the same thing for the other facing. If the collar does not go as planned, I will let you know. If it does go as planned, I'll probably just show you what it looks like once I've sewn it down. So I'm definitely nervous that this facing is gonna be way too stiff. Right now I have pressed it in place and then I've pinned down the other edge so that I can maybe like train it. It's the end of the night for me sewing wise. I am past my bedtime, and so I'm hoping that maybe by like training this fold that it will be good tomorrow, because otherwise I'm gonna have to undo my pinning and figure out what to do about this collar. I have pinned everything down as far as like on the inside goes, with the facing and the collar and all of that all the way down the front that's all pinned in place, ready to be sewn if the collar participates. The other part that has me a little bit hesitant is that really the trim that's on the yoke front here, well, that will be on the yoke front here, should go into the seam here, but I don't have that trim yet because I think I mentioned I went to Joann's and it failed. So I ordered stuff on Amazon, and some of the Amazon stuff arrived and it's pretty decent. I'm actually kind of liking this color combo, and this is 3/16 of an inch, and it doesn't actually feel too wide. I mean, it's only 1/16 of an inch wider than what I was going for. So even with 3 of them, I had pinned them on earlier, and even with 3 of them, it didn't feel too wide. I wasn't sure about this color though, so I also ordered navy. Except they sent me 5/16 of an inch for navy. So that's going back. And then the other stuff is coming on Wednesday. So I don't know. I want to finish this before then, but I kind of like this. I might do this. And I also did start covering my buttons. I've done about like 10 buttons out of like 32. So yeah, but there's an overall view of it right now on Lady Jane. And I'm liking how the neckline is looking so far. I have been working away at the tea gown, and I have almost all of the facings and the collar and everything totally stitched down. So that looks like that. Hopefully you can see that. And I just did that all with whip stitches. I still have like part of one side to go. So oh yeah, on the second side, okay, maybe I haven't done like most of it, but I've done more than half of it. I need to stitch down from here to the bottom. So it's still a bit to go, but I was doing some hand sewing while playing trivia and I got all that done. So that's awesome. And then I also made 31 of my 32 buttons. And the reason that I only made 31 of 32 is because I realized I should probably show you how I make buttons. I mean, they're just the covered button kits that you get from Joann's, but I feel like, I don't know, I have some tips. So I am going to show you how I make the last one. Okay, so first off, I have actually cut 2 layers for these buttons. So I have the wool that is the outer layer. You can see a finished button right here. And I have that wool outer layer, but this wool is actually semi-sheer. I don't know if that comes up at all on camera. You can see a little bit of light through there. It's semi-sheer. And so because of that, if you put this directly over the metal button, you actually get a little bit of light reflection. I know it's not doing it right now, but you do get a little bit of light reflection through because of the shine of the button. So what I've done to combat that is that I have a little piece of cotton organdy that I back my button with. And I use this because it is semi-sheer and lightweight, but it takes away that shine. So I just stack them like that. I use this little thing. These are 7/8 inch buttons, by the way, and then they come with this nice little plastic guide. And so I use this to cut out my pieces. And so I've cut out 64 pieces for all of these. And then once you do that, this is the side that will be the outside of the button. Flip that over with the cotton organdy inside and center it on your little plastic doohickey that comes with the kit. And then take the round part of the button, and this is how you can kind of tell that you're centered, and you just want to press in. I find that these buttons are kind of sharp on the edges, so like press in with the fabric so you don't hurt yourself. And then you just kind of fold all of these edges in there, and you take your button back and just get that lid on there really quickly so that everything's all in there. Now you take your little blue doohickey, and I have been finding that these don't work very well. On a 5/8 inch button, a lot of times you can just like press down by hand and create your button and it works. And this isn't working. And in fact, on 5/8 inch buttons, sometimes if by hand doesn't work, you can use the back of a pen and that works. Yeah, that didn't work on this either. So I found this metal tube. I have no idea why I have a metal tube, but I have one. And that's why this looks so rough on here, because I have actually been using the metal tube, which has fairly sharp edges, to push down on this button. And you want to rock it back and forth. Sometimes you can kind of feel when it pops down. Sometimes it doesn't give you that nice pop. By the way, I'm doing this on top of a book because the book is a nice hard surface, whereas my table, because it's got cotton batting and ironing board cover underneath the canvas, it has just a tiny bit of squish and the book doesn't. So I think that's just about in, but this side's giving me a little bit of nerve, so I'm just gonna go back on there, rock it that way, and I think we're good. I do hate these buttons. I find that they tend to break really, really easily. These are these guys, by the way, the Dritz cover button kits. And unfortunately, they are one of the only options out there, at least at my Joann's. This is the only thing that they sell for cover buttons. And considering all of their buttons look like garbage, these are the only way to get non-garbage looking buttons. That said, half the time these buttons break. So yeah, use at your own risk. But we pop that out and we have our nice little finished button. And now these 32 buttons can be used to make my buttonholes and then be attached to the tea gown. So I'm ready to start with buttonholes and then sewing on the buttons right now. And so what I'm doing here, even though I don't have my actual trim, unless of course I wind up using this as my actual trim, I mocked up some trim here. This is going about 7/8 of an inch from the seam down to midpoint on the trim, like halfway through the trim. And that's how it is on the old one as well. So even with this slightly thicker trim, that 7/8 seems to work well. And then I didn't want the button to cover up the trim, so it's just below that. So this pin is marking where that button is, and I just kind of like laid 3 buttons out to see what they would look like. I pinned the overlap shut first, but I laid the buttons out to see what they would look like, and then I went back and measured between these pins and made them even, and it wound up being 1 3/4 inches between each of these pins, and then these are 7/8 inch buttons, so it takes up a lot of the room there. And I think that that's a really good layout. Like the buttons don't seem too close together. They start at a good place. Up here is going to be hooks instead, by the way. And I had a little bit where I was trying to figure out which way I wanted to lap it over, because my extant one actually laps over left over right instead of right over left, like all of our modern clothing laps right over left. But in the end, it came down to the fact that this corner up here just doesn't look nice on this side, and it looks nice on this side. So I decided to go with this side over that side because it looks better. Yeah, I know, superficial. But I think that this will be good. I'm going to do my buttons horizontally, which I feel like I don't normally do. I normally do vertical buttonholes instead of horizontal buttonholes. But all of my accents that have buttons have horizontal buttonholes. So yeah, that just seemed like the best option. I'm gonna do that. And now I need to mark all of the buttonholes and then make 32 of them. And of course, make a test buttonhole first, because you never know and you just wanna be safe. Oh no, I underestimated. There are not 32 buttonholes. There are 34 buttonholes. Ah, too many buttons and buttonholes. Well, I guess I have to make 2 more buttons. So I decided to try putting some buttons on all of my little lines and seeing what they looked like. And I took 8 buttons and did that, and they just look too close together. So maybe I won't have 34 buttons after all. I have now spaced these out so there's 1/8 inch extra. These are all 1 7/8 inches apart, and that looks way better than they did before. So I'm gonna go with that and just redraw all of these lines. I don't know how people exist without a one-step buttonhole. Done, 23 to go. All right, the 32 buttonholes are all in the, I was gonna say bodice, but it's a dress. When I first stitched the first one out, it was like, oh my god, that's so big, but it does make sense for how big these buttons are, like they just fit through. So anyway, they're all in, and what I've now done is marked this side with where they have to go. And the way that I did that at first was I closed the front up and I went to about like I don't know, here-ish, just overlapping and pinning. And so basically I marked the first two through the buttonhole, and then I just measured 1 7/8 inch down all the way down to the hem. And then I compared where the last buttonhole was and the last dot was, and I was like, crap, these are not at all the same, because I lined up the edge of the skirt basically to do that, and it was like, oh my god, they're not the same. So then I went and I pinned it all like this so that it was sandwiched together with the insides together, I guess, and found out that that's because my skirt is different lengths in the front. So that's interesting. Not sure how that happened, but that's how it is. So anyway, now I went through, and once I had it pinned like this, I stuck one of my really straight pins through each buttonhole just to confirm that these spots were all in the right place. I had a couple that were off by like maybe a 1/16 inch, and I corrected those, but everything else was right on. So I do want to double check that I've done them the same distance from the edge, because again, these two I did through the buttonhole, and so I know that they're the right distance, but then these I just like put the mark 1 7/8 inch down. So I didn't pay attention to how far they were from the edge. I was just kind of eyeballing. So I do need to go back in with a ruler and make sure that they're all the same. And then I can sew on my buttons. It is the end of the night for sewing for me, and I have attached 14 of the 32 buttons, but the good thing is that I got all the way past, or down to, I guess, the hip, and that means that it will be easier to fit and put on for stuff when I want to, for example, do sleeves. I'm hoping to do all of the sleeves tomorrow, because really there's not much left to this, actually. I mean, there's the trim, there's the sleeves, there's the hem, and then there's the rest of the buttons, and the pockets. I can't forget the pockets. But that's it. So, and I can't do the trim yet because trim's not here yet, or probably not here yet. So what I can do is sleeves and finish the buttons, and then get scared about welt pockets. That'll go like right here, and might be patch pockets instead of welt pockets. But honestly, I can't really do that without the trim either, because the pockets do have, or the pocket flaps do have that trim oh so nicely on those flaps. And that's kind of like the one big designating thing there. And honestly, like with the sleeves, I don't want to sew up the whole sleeve. Like I don't want to hem the sleeve, or I can't hem the sleeve, because the trim is actually put into the seam, and they did such a wonderful job of it. I do hope to do a slightly better job of my trim matching, but yeah, I want my trim to go into the seams like they do. So I can do the rest of the sleeve. I can pattern the sleeve. I can, mock up the sleeve, make it out of the actual fabric, and sew the whole thing together up until about here-ish. And then I want to wait for the trim to be able to finish that. So anyway, I will see you all tomorrow. So I'm attempting to draft out sleeves right now, and I'm having a bit of a moment, because this sleeve, which comes from this pattern right here, which I both love and hate because it's the ugliest thing on the cover, but does have some useful things. This sleeve I thought would be like a kind of close to what I need. It is a leg of mutton sleeve for the 1890s, just so you can see this full thing. I have to get far enough away from it, and I thought maybe that would work. But I went and I did a whole bunch of measuring of my antique sleeve. So I measured the pleat depth, basically how much fabric is being pleated into what size armscye is what I measured. And I wound up that I was getting 44 inches of total fabric being pleated into a 16 3/8 inch armscye, which when you translate it to oh, don't mind the velvet ribbon, I was just trying to figure out trim stuff. But when you translate it to mine, which is 22 and 0.25 inches around the armscye, that would equal a 61 inch sleeve around the sleeve head. And unfortunately, this is a 45 inch sleeve. So my sleeve needs to be way bigger than this. So I guess I'm gonna have to like slash and spread or draft on my own or something like that, because this one is unfortunately not gonna cut it, and I don't think I have anything bigger. Okay, this is probably going to be really challenging to show you, but I do want to try. So what I've done here is I've taken that same sleeve pattern, the one from the Butterick pattern, and I've just sort of pinned it to the fold in the actual antique sleeve to try to see how different this sleeve shape is from this one, because I could just tell that like by the time it got partway up the arm to about here, going up towards the armpit, that the sleeve was no longer shaped the same. So again, I don't know how much of this I can show. I don't know how to actually pattern extant garments, or take a pattern from extant garments. So yeah, this is gonna be kind of funky. But basically, if this will stop falling down, the curve starts to differentiate right up here. So I have this pinned all along the fold, which means like where it just wants to fold, starting down with the wrist. And I've just followed that fold up, which happens to be the back of the center pleat. That is where that fold goes to. And as I'm doing that, like it's running up the back fine, because of course it's a fold, but once we get to about here, it's like the sleeve almost twists, and it also starts to come away from the shape of this pattern where the sleeve is actually curving up more this way than the pattern. So it's got a more extreme curve. And I kind of figured that that would be the case because this sleeve across right here at the arm's eye is only like, what was it? I think it was like 15 inches or something, and the other one is 19 inches. So the other one definitely has a larger head, and I think that that is the key to getting the head on mine to match the scaled up, is to increase the actual width of the size of the head. Okay, I thought I'd at least give you a little bit of the vantage point that I was seeing. So this is where it's coming away from this side, but also what's happening here is that so we started again, we're like on the fold and we have the seam down here, but this seam, it's traveling up the fold to about right here. And then the seam, wow, it's dark under there. The seam starts traveling away from the fold so that we know that the two halves of the sleeve are not even, because one side, this side, is a little wider than this side, and that's why the seam is traveling that way. So not only are we leaving the pattern shape here behind, but one side also is different than the other side. It's not going to be able to be like on the fold like this pattern seems to be so far. So those are just key things that I'm going to take in mind when I'm making mine. The other thing that you might be able to notice here is that this pattern is obviously larger than this sleeve, which is good because my arm is larger than this sleeve. And the pattern is larger here, and then it's smaller up there. So not only does it need to come out to here and then to its seam line, it needs to come out farther so that it can fit my arm. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to translate all of that into a sleeve. So I decided that while I'm looking at sleeves, I would pull out my 1830s sleeve pattern that I used on my plaid 1830s dress, just to see what that looked like in comparison. And actually, it's kind of close to following the lines that I need it to as far as it curving out here. You'll notice I made these notes about where it needs to curve out to match the extant one. And now the extant one, again, it's not actually cut on the fold, which this is like cut on the fold, but it's fairly close to this curve, though it doesn't, I don't think, curve back down like this. I could be wrong, but I don't think it curves back down. So I think it just kind of continues this curve like out that way, but it's really hard for me to tell what the pattern looks like once it gets into the arm's eye. Especially with it not being on the fold or, you know, on the half, it's really hard for me to tell. But this is larger than 61 inches total. So that gives me a pretty good starting point, and honestly, I'm tempted to not worry about it not being on the fold, because that's just another complication that I don't really need, and I might just try it on the fold and try and see what it looks like from there. So ignoring that, but doing this general shape and giving myself a little bit more height up here. I had given myself a note to add 4 inches up to the top. I don't know that I need quite that many, but that would put me at about the scaled up length that I would need based on the inner arm measurement. So what I did was I measured the inside of the arm versus the inside of my arm, because that should be fairly fitted, and that then I took the outside measurement of the arm and scaled that up to my size, and it wound up being about 38 inches compared to the inside. So you can really see the shape right there. So I need to get to about 38 inches to get that shape. All right, so this is the pattern that I've come up with. It is on the fold, so it is a little different than the actual extant one, but again, that was just going to be too much for my brain. And it's also, I think, a little bit too big because this measurement right here should be 31 and it is currently 33. So I think that I may have made it too wide across, but like it's close. I mean, the length is the right length according to scale, and then the underarm is the right underarm length according to scale, but I think maybe it's that it should have tapered a little bit up so that I could get a little bit narrower of a thing here. So we'll see. I mean, I can always cut it smaller just as comparison with this butterick sleeve so that you can see the difference. It is really very extreme difference. So a little bit, I don't know, nervous about that, but the only thing to do is to try, and I have cut this out of cotton organdy so that it has that nice body. My plan is to flatline my wool with the cotton organdy. I know it won't give me quite as much crispy, nice body as this linen has, which this was linen lined with lightweight cotton, but my wool is much more drapey than this linen, so I don't know, I'm doing what I can, but it's not going to have that body with just the organdy. Anyway, I am going to stitch up this side here and then attempt to do some pleats. I'm not going to like make it perfect math like it is on the sleeve, but I'm going to attempt to do some pleats to fit it into the armscye and see how that goes. Oh my gosh, you guys. So I really thought that this mock-up was going to be way too big, but I actually kind of love it. There is, of course, still the possibility that it is way too big once I put the wool with this, but the way that the organdy is fitting me is perfection. Now, it did wind up needing an extra pleat in the armscye, and my pleats aren't lined up where they should be, so that does need to be tweaked, because really this center pleat here should line up with the center pleat on the sleeve. So the pleats need to be tweaked because I didn't measure them putting my mock-up in. I just pleated and fitted, and it wound up needing one extra pleat and being off kilter. But like, it's fitting perfectly. The seam is in the exact perfect space, which all I did for that was I measured how far off the sleeve seam hits from the side bodice seam. I measured it exactly from the extant one to mine, and it is in the perfect place. I mean, this is following the shape of my arm so perfectly, I can't even. And then this is also my first time buttoning up the whole dress. Again, the hips still need to be tweaked because they had that weird thing that I mentioned before, but the body, I think, needs to come in about a ½ inch on each side, right at the waist. The rest of it feels so nice. The length, I feel like literally just needs to be turned up narrow hem, and that's it. I know you can't see the length at all, but that's all. And it's just feeling so good. I think I forgot to press these darts, so that needs to happen. But like, the whole thing is just coming together, and my mind is kind of like blown because I thought that this project was not going right at all. I was worried that once I had all the buttons in that it just wasn't gonna work. And I mean, it's a tiny big, but like not much. I can just, you know, take that little bit out right at the waist and that'll be perfect. And then the sleeve is great, and it's just like, now I can breathe that sigh of relief that everything is going well on this. That said, it's Sunday, so I'm not finishing this week. I had really hoped to, but it's not happening. I am going to work on the sleeves today because it's only about noon right now. So I'm going to work on the sleeves today and get the sleeves all done in this vlog, but that's still going to leave hem, trimming, and pockets, which I'm still afraid of, for next week. So, and the final reveal, of course. So all of that is going to go into one more week of this project. Didn't finish it on my timeline, but you know what? Life happens. And sometimes you just don't feel like sewing. I mean, yesterday my brain wasn't working, so that's why after I put my mock-up together, I stopped working on like sleeve stuff, and I just sewed the rest of the buttons on. So all of my buttons are now on except for my very bottom button, and that's because I figured that was going to get in the way of the hem. So once I hem it, I will put that last bottom button on, but all of the rest of them, 31 buttons, are all on. Took forever, but it was the mindless sewing that I needed last night when my brain wasn't functioning for sleeves. But apparently my brain was functioning for sleeves, and I just didn't trust myself because look at that sleeve. So excited. So yeah, I think I just kind of need to mark where the pleats need to go to line up with this because it's set into the arm's eye exactly right. I just need to pleat it differently to get my pleats to line up. And I'm so relieved. I still won't be able to finish off the bottom yet until that last trim option gets here. And then of course all the trim will need to go on the neckline and stuff too. But again, that will be next week. So I'm gonna take this sleeve out, mark where the top, well, I'm gonna mark where the top needs to go, take the sleeve out, and make up my sleeves in wool. If I need to take it in once I do the wool, that's fine, because taking it in, like, I have room for that. It's just taking it in. So yeah, I'm super, super excited, and I'm gonna get going on some sleeves. The first thing that I'm doing, since my actual like mock-up worked and I'm going to use it in the sleeve, is I've gone and I've made a paper pattern of the sleeve so that I can have it for later, because this is a nice shape and I think that this will be useful for a lot of other 1890s things, just because it is such a nice shape and it worked so well. So I've cut this out of paper. I had to do it in half because the sleeve is just so big that it didn't fit on my table. So I've cut it in paper. Now I'm going to cut the other piece of organdy and I'm going to cut it out of the wool and flatline it via the serger and then sew up the seams there, and then I'll figure out the pleating. So I will probably show it to you again, maybe at pleating stage or maybe when I am putting it on or have put it on. So I have the first sleeve all pleated up now. I didn't want to put on my corset so it doesn't quite fit, but somehow, and I think it's because the wool is heavier and droopier, somehow it's also like really long on me now, and I think it's because it's drooping all down my arm. Now some of this is going to go away with the hem anyway, but like the hem was only going to be maybe an inch because it's just turned up twice, and this I feel like is now at least 1.5 inches too long. So that's not ideal, and it definitely is droopier, but I don't think there's really anything that I can do about that. Possibly maybe worth taking in a little bit here so that the lower arm stays nice and taut. I might try that, and then swinging it out under the arm here. So yeah, I might give that a try, just make it a little bit tighter so that it doesn't get that droop, but I can still like bend my arm. I think that might be the solution, but I think it's still giving me a good shape. So again, like the pattern overall is good. Now I've left the bottom 5.5 inches open. It's just pinned right now on the sleeve so that I can put the trim on and then turn up the hem. But yeah, I mean, overall pretty good. It took me a lot to figure out the pleating on here, and that was mostly because I was really trying to get the 5 pleats on each side of the center, well, including the center pleat, 5 on each side that the extant dress has. But at some point, I think the 3rd time that I repleated it to try to get it to fit, first I just went through and I kind of eyeballed measurements and tried to get it to fit, and that didn't work. And but I did base it off the original measurements of like how deep the pleats were. Then I actually went and I scaled up all of the measurements. So I did the algebra equation, like finding X for each of the measurements based on now how much volume was getting pleated in instead of how much volume was before. And I tried to do that. But I realized that what that did was it spaced my pleats too far away from each other. Like each pleat was about 1 inch, 1.5 inches, maybe even from the previous pleat. And I didn't want that. I wanted them all to stay about like, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch, 7/8. They're not even, but they're all like pretty closely even. And I wanted them to stay under that 1 inch mark. So what I wound up doing was I wound up putting an extra pleat on each side because I realized there's just no way to get the pleats to still have the narrow width and only have 5 on each side. So there's now 6 pleats on each side of the center pleat. The other thing that I realized is that I think I mentioned before that I thought the center pleat was centered with the center pleat on the neckline. It's not on the extant dress. It is fully like back from it. So basically the center fold of the sleeve is the front fold of the center pleat. So that's like basically this fold is centered with the center pleat. So I think I got it just about right. But yeah, that took me like a while just to even fathom and wrap my mind around the fact that this was here instead of that being there. So yeah, this first sleeve took me way too long. Hopefully I can now reproduce the same thing on the second sleeve a little bit easier, fingers crossed, because again, I do want to finish both of these sleeves tonight, and it is already 8:22. So I think I'm going to go ahead and tighten this up to the elbow just a little bit and then set that second sleeve in the same way that this one is. Then I'll put my corset back on and I'll show you what everything looks like there. Well, I still didn't feel like putting my corset back on, but I did get the other sleeve in, and it took a little bit of fiddling with trying to get the pleats right, but it was definitely way easier the second time, so that's great. I also took the sleeves in here. I haven't yet removed the excess fabric, so I'm just gonna serge, hello Dora, I'm just gonna serge off that little extra bit there. I think Dora wants to be on camera. But now I'm distracted because of Dora. So anyway, I'm serging off the extra bit there. I'm going to do that next. But otherwise, the sleeves are definitely fitting a lot better now. I think at this point, I can just turn it up twice to get that sort of 1-inch hem, and it'll work perfectly well. And again, I'm really happy with the sleeves. I think that they are now sitting just like I want them to. And the organdy is still helping to give them a little volume. I mean, obviously they're not like sticking out like this, but it is still definitely giving that fullness up at the top, and then the nice tight bottom of the leg of mutton sleeve. Actually, this is doing like a really good job up here. So yeah, just removing that little bit of excess, and then that part of the sleeve will be done. Again, these are just pinned. I'll get that when the trim is done. But yeah, I'm excited for where this is. I did earlier when I had put it on with the corset, I did mark the very front of my hem, like the front 10 inches. And I also put some pins on here to denote where I think the pocket is gonna go. I'm still torn about doing a welt pocket versus a patch pocket. I think honestly, I might mock up a patch pocket and see how that goes next week. And yeah, if I don't hate it, then I won't do the welt pocket, and it'll save me a lot of stress and worry. And otherwise, next week is going to be all about welt pockets. So anyway, that is going to be it for me for this week. I'm giving myself a compassionate deadline and allowing myself to take up a third week with this project, particularly because my trim's not here yet. I do hope that you enjoyed this video though. If you liked this video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube twice a week with my sewing vlogs like this on Tuesdays and other costuming content out on Saturdays, but I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me over on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to support me in all of that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi account down below. And I do want to give a special shout out to my Edwardian level patron, Heidi. Once again, thank you all so much for joining me this week. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing! Say bye, Dora! Happy sewing! Okay, she doesn't want to be picked up. Bye!